Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Blizzard Arena!
I've been a fan of Overwatch since I first heard about it during the open beta. The diversity and art style drew me in, but the high-level strategy kept me interested. I was extraordinarily excited when Blizzard announced the Overwatch League, mostly because of how unique it was going to be relative to other esports. The league was announced with a fair amount of similarities to traditional sports, from teams based in specific cities to benefits for the players, which showed the depth of support from the developer. Since its launch, I've been obsessed with the Overwatch League. I wanted to see if franchising, or basing cities in teams as opposed to random organizations, was actually a successful path, since Overwatch is doing it and League of Legends seems to be going that way as well. I created a survey, which asked people a variety of questions from their gender to where they're from to what Overwatch League team they support. I was curious to see the different trends of viewership, and I was hoping for around 200 responses, but when I opened it up to the competitive Overwatch subreddit, I ended up getting over 1,000 responses. So let's dive into what the data showed. Oh, also, I'm going to be including a viewable link to the spreadsheet for anyone who wants to see the raw data for themselves. First, a little warning. While the sample size is great, the data is most certainly not random, which means this may be less representative of the general viewing public than it is of people who subscribe to the competitive Overwatch subreddit. And I was pretty worried about how the data would turn out, and I'll warn everyone when I think specific data points may not represent the general populace. So let's start with information about age and viewing habits. The mean age of people who respond to the survey is 22.2 years old, while the median age is 21, and the most common number that popped up was 19. Apparently the oldest viewer is 120 years old, but the next highest number is 52, which seems a little more realistic. The youngest recorded age was an unfathomable 0, and the next lowest numbers were 9 and 12, which seem a little more reasonable. The standard deviation is about 6.14, which means that 68.2% of respondents are between around 16 and 28 years old. The data has a positive skew, indicating that the right end tail is longer than the left end. Essentially, more people said they were younger, but there were more answers on the older end, so the graph would have a bit of a tail towards the right. All in all, the data on age appears to be fairly representative of the population viewing the Overwatch League and doesn't seem to be too skewed by Reddit statistics, although it might skew a little bit young because of Reddit. I don't think it's super significant though. Further, most people watched the Overwatch League on Twitch with 86.4%, versus the Overwatch League site with 11.5%, and MLG.TV with 2.2%, which fits what I expected. The amount of games people watched a week was fairly evenly split, with most people watching between 3 and 8 matches. Let's talk about team support now, starting with just general support before going into factors like gender and location. Overall, Dallas had the most support with 40.24% of respondents rooting for their success. Second is New York Excelsior with 33.37% of support, and third is the Houston Outlaws with about 32.37%, almost exactly 1% less than Nixle. The rest fall as you can see in the chart, with Shanghai, Florida, and San Francisco rounding out the bottom of the charts. It's interesting to see how this support compares to the placement of teams at the end of Stage 1, with 5 of the top 6 placed teams also being in the top 6 supported teams. The notable exception to this is the Dallas Fuel, who got 10th place at the end of Stage 1, but are first in terms of support. I think there are a few potential reasons for this discrepancy, one of which being the fact that Dallas has some of the most famous and popular streamers on their team, including Taimu, XQC, and Seagull. The Dallas Fuel team was also Team Envious before entering into the Overwatch League, which was very popular and successful. That's one of the problems with this dataset. A lot of the people on the competitive Overwatch subreddit were likely fans of professional Overwatch before the Overwatch League existed, so they may just be supporting the same team or certain people they liked before the OWL existed. One of the most interesting things I found is that the typical respondent supported around 2.4 Overwatch League teams, which is a fairly unique phenomenon relative to traditional sports, where fans typically stick to one team. If I had to guess, I'd say that most people probably have one team they support more strongly than the others, but it's still interesting to see that difference. In terms of gender, men and women tend to have slightly different views on which and how many teams they support. As a precursor, let's just briefly talk about the differences in responses for men and women to the survey. Of the 1,004 responses, 844 were male, 148 were female, and 12 people selected other or prefer not to answer. So 84% of respondents were male, while only about 15% were female. It's easy to see this data and think that only 15% of Overwatch League viewers are female, but again, this data is more representative of the competitive Overwatch subreddit than of the general viewership, and Reddit as a service skews predominantly male. Before I posted this survey to Reddit, about a third of all respondents were female, which is still smaller, but over double the final results. Anyway, let's look at what the two groups decided were their favorite teams. Both men and women had similar percentages for how the teams broke down. For women, the top team was Nixle with 41.89% of support, while Houston was second with 33.78%, and Dallas was third with 30.41%. For men, the top three were Dallas with 41.82%, Houston with 32.33%, and Nixle with 31.99%. The biggest difference between men and women was the amount of support for Boston. Boston was 10th in terms of support for women and 5th in terms of support for men. The only team who was in the same place was Houston, who was 2nd for both, but oddly 3rd overall. On average, women supported 2.7 teams, while men supported roughly 2.3 teams. On a side note, 16 people said they didn't support a specific team, one person said they supported every team in the league, and another person said they both didn't support a specific team and that they supported the Dallas Fuel. In terms of support based on location, this was the area I was most interested in going into the survey. This was really the goal. I wanted to see if people based in areas with Overwatch League teams were more likely to support the team from that area, so I asked 2 questions. What state or region are you from, and what state or region do you live in currently? I was really worried once I opened this up to the subreddit that the survey would show that people didn't support teams based in the area, since I figured people on the subreddit supported teams mostly based on players and teams that were established for the Overwatch League. However, I did find some correlation between where people are from / where they currently live and the teams they support. For every area, at least 50% of people who said they were from or lived in an area with an Overwatch League team supported at least one of the teams from that area, which is pretty good. In the graphs, the areas with asterisks are areas where there were fewer than 50 responses. People from Texas, Massachusetts, and the New York tri-state area have the highest support for teams based in their area, with 93.62%, 85.19%, and 71.19% respectively. The differences between where you're from and where you currently live are not particularly significant, as they're fairly small, and within the margin of error. The area with the lowest support would be EU countries in support for London, but I feel like this makes sense because there are so many different countries within the EU that I doubt would support England in any other case. There was some other interesting information I got from the survey, including the fact that more people living in Texas support just Houston as opposed to supporting just Dallas, at 50.94% versus 30.19%. This also means that about 12.48% of people who live in Texas support both Houston and Dallas. There also seems to be somewhat of a correlation between nationality and team you support based on players for the team. For example, 75% of people from Finland support the Outlaws, which has the league's only Finnish player in Linkser, and 62.5% of people from Canada support at least one team with a Canadian player. Overall, there seems to be a decent correlation between location and support for Overwatch League teams. Finally, the last question I asked on the survey was what people wanted as new locations for Overwatch League teams. I was interested to see where people thought the Overwatch League was lacking representation, and there seemed to be 2 main responses: the Midwest and abroad. The biggest individual places were Chicago and the EU, with 100 and 109 responses respectively. A fair amount of people said they wanted more EU teams representing specifically where they're from, with Paris being a popular choice. A city that I think would be really cool and that also had a fair amount of support was Busan, which had 26 responses. Busan would be an interesting choice given the amount of South Korean players in the league. Personally, I think the Overwatch League should expand overseas before adding more US-based teams, with places like Berlin, Paris, Busan, Toronto, and potentially Tokyo getting the first round of new teams, although I understand the desire for more Midwest-based teams. Some of the most interesting responses were Hawaii, Glasgow, Brazil, Juneau, Mexico, and Warsaw, Poland. All in all, it seems like franchising has been successful, and I think that if the sample included people from outside the subreddit, it would show a higher correlation between location and support. Most of the people I've talked to while playing the game seem to support their local team, and I think a significant portion of the subreddit were fans of the teams before the Overwatch League formed and followed that support into the Overwatch League. I also asked questions about viewership of other more traditional American sports, but overwhelmingly people responded saying they didn't watch these sports, so that data isn't particularly useful. The Overwatch League has found pretty strong success, and I think it's only going to get better from here. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. What do you all think? I'm currently planning on running another survey with some changes to make it easier to calculate in the future, to see how things change, and to get more respondents from outside of the subreddit. Would you like to see an update? Are there questions you think I should ask that it didn't? Finally, I wanted to send a sincere thank you to all those who answered the survey. I couldn't have anticipated the response I got, and that's all thanks to you guys. You're the best. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.